So we're live.
Yeah. Welcome back. Sorry about that, guys. So if you were tuning in, we lost power, or I lost power, and since I'm the one hosting, that means I lost everything that we were doing up until a couple minutes ago. So with that in mind, we're back. Everything is back in place, and we should be good to continue from where we left off. I will probably go in and just edit the videos to just link the two of them together, but it's technically a new feed, so welcome back. Continue where we were.
Cool. Yeah. So, yeah, what I was gonna say was, you had brought up how that guy who murdered his ex-wife, how was he able to get the gun? You know, if he's like a known domestic abuser. And I was gonna say, how he I wasn't. I'm not. I don't. I'm not entirely sure how he acquired the weapon and or what he used to murder his wife. However, our the way he acquired the weapon isn't necessarily didn't have to be a legal way, and that's what I was going to bring up. So you have New Zealand, Australia, UK. They're all prime examples of countries pretty successfully removing illegal guns off the streets. Now, the United States is in a very different situation because they're island nations, right? They don't have to worry about neighbors. United States is not that situation. As you know, we have a neighbor to the south, Mexico, that is incapable and sometimes uh, unwilling to enforce its own laws. So you have a lot of contraband, a lot of drugs over coming through that border. What I see is that if we were to if we were to make it more difficult for um, people to acquire guns, I don't see why it wouldn't just be replaced by the black market. You see what I'm saying? Like, how is the United States in a position to remove these illegal guns off the streets?
It's not about the complete removal, first of all. It's
Okay.
about limiting the distribution, right? The black
Hmm.
market is something that the biggest thing I care about is the kids getting shot up, right?
Yeah.
Your average 14, 15, 16, 19-year-old, whatever, doesn't have access to this super secretive black market. Yes, there is going to be the ones that exist, but you shouldn't get rid of a solution that fixes 90% of the problem because it doesn't solve that extra 10%.
Oh, with this, I'm not even sure if it would solve 90% of the problem because like I mean, there's like a crap ton of drugs coming from straight from over that border. That's where the majority of illegal drugs come from. And if we were to implement similar laws to some of the aforementioned states like New Zealand, Australia, etc., it you would now see an influx of guns coming from that way. Like we can't stop drugs from coming over here, so I don't see how we could even stop the guns from coming over here. And it wouldn't be. I mean, and it's not like the black market is that hard to get to, right? If I mean, I feel like a 16, 17-year old, if they want weed, they're able to get that. I mean, even before now it's legalized in a lot of states, but I mean, before then, 5 or 6 years ago, it was like a black market everywhere. It's pretty easy to get. I feel like even like your harder drugs, like your meth, etc., was pretty easy to get. You don't think guns would be, similarly easy to get?
Well, one, weed you can grow in a pot, so it's
Well,
way easier. It's like 9 day. But meth is a good example, right? Meth
hmm
is accessible, but it's also not nearly as accessible as the first situation, weed, right? And we do have situations where we reduce the amount of meth in an area by using regulation. That said, the best way to combat drugs is not through legalization or illegalization as much. It's about training, it's about teaching people, education, things like that, which is part of why other countries are so much more successful than we are fighting drugs. And we can do the same thing with guns.
But
So real
so
quick, while we're
okay,
at it, we have a couple comments, so I wanted to address them real quick, and either of you
yeah.
can take them, or if you'd like, I can field them. It says, doesn't the introduction of a gun into any situation increase the likelihood of someone being killed intentionally or not? Also, wouldn't the gun migration issue have far less effect on non-border states? So, Geo, it looks like part of that is at least addressed to you, because we're talking about guns coming across the border. And then either of you can fill the first part if you'd like, or both of you can.
Yeah. I guess if the last one is at me. Also, wouldn't the gun migration issue have far less effect on non-border states? I mean, yeah. I mean, I think that's essentially the point that I was making. So, like UK, if it was 1 year, it was only like 3 people in the entire country that had been shot. Like 3 shootings in the entire country, and so that's United States is not in a situation where it could effectively, you know, have anywhere near the success rate that the UK has had. Just because of its border, we can't stop people from coming over it. We can't stop drugs from coming over it. So I don't see how we could stop guns from coming over it, and that's what I was concerned about, because like the people who are responsible enough to obtain the gun legally and go through the background check and etc. They're not the ones just going to go shoot up a school. The the criminals who are like the type of homicidal psychopath who's going to go murder a bunch of people. I don't think he would have a problem, getting this weapon from a black market.
I mean, a lot of the homicidal psychopaths that you're talking about are basically just white teenagers that have a fairly stable outside look. They're not usually they're not involved in, this heavy criminal element. They're just kids that snap. So it's
Yep.
limiting their access, and a lot of them have access to guns at home. That's how the vast majority of them get their weapons, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying it's going to be 100% effective. I'm saying
Mhm.
you're limiting it will will not completely, will vastly decrease the amount of people, the amount of kids that are getting shot up like this.
So let's just kind of take a step down the old let's talk about that direction. Let's say hypothetically that these kids, which typically are white males and they're probably teenagers to early 20s, let's say they're getting them from home. What's to stop their parent or someone in their home from passing these gun laws and licenses, and then have guns in their home, and then the kids just take them anyway? Like, we haven't really. It seems like if that's what's happening and that's how they're acquiring guns, then adding restrictions to the person who goes out and buys the guns doesn't matter, because they're still passing the restrictions.
So this is kind of another part of licensing, which I wasn't sure if we were going to get into, but I'm glad you asked this question. Part of the way you make consequences like this and make the parents teach their kids how to actually be responsible about guns is to implement that liability chain, where if they let their kid have access to these weapons, right, now they're as liable for those murders as the child is, because they're the guardians. They're the ones who need to take responsibility.
So,
Changing
does
that
that apply to
attitude in
like
the United
18-year-old
States
and 19 year
would
olds who still live at
completely
home?
change the idea of how people treat guns.
So, does that apply to 18-year-old and 19-year-olds who are considered legal, who still are legal adults who still live at home? Because, at that point, like,
Yes.
where does it stop? Is it 20, 21, 25?
Well,
Like,
it's not about the age. It's about anybody that's using your gun to murder people.
Not-
If they didn't break into your safe or break into the way you safely secure it based on how you were licensed, then you're liable.
So, like, let's just say hypothetically, you have a couple buddies over, and they know you have firearms in your home, and they use one of those firearms and kill someone else that's at your home, are you also now liable?
Did you give them access to your safe, or did they break into your safe
I mean, who
and
says it
steal
was
it?
in a safe? I mean, like, being in a safe isn't gonna, like, it's not the way typically people store things that are for, like, home defense. Like, whether that be, like, if you only own one gun and it's a shotgun, chances are you're not gonna lock it in a safe, because if someone breaks down your door in the middle of the night, the safe's kind of a big hindrance.
You won't be able to get to it in
Yeah,
time.
you're not going to be able to get to it before the person who just broke in your window or broke down your door is going to just either, use their gun or use some sort of weapon or force to stop you. So most people put it in an accessible place and may have some sort of either safety on it or just something that's easily removable in order to protect themselves, but that may not always be the case. So you're saying the responsibility needs to then go off to someone in that situation?
Yeah, so essentially there should be because we can develop situations where a person can get access to their weapon quickly while still keeping it secure from other people. We have the technology now. That's not really much of an issue. And if you create the license where it teaches people how this works, then it's not a problem.
So real quick, another comment says, do you think Canada has done a decent job at curbing gun violence, even though it's not an island nation? It borders the U.S., which has an enormous amount of firearms. The U.S. looks like they have about...
Oh yeah, I think that's directed towards me. Well, I know their homicide rate is substantially lower than the United States, but from my understanding, so yeah, I mean they do a better job overall, but from my understanding, Canada is in a very similar position as the United States, that it is generally safe, but you have pockets of concentrated violence in areas that raises the average for everywhere else. Like Illinois is generally safe, but Chicago's there, so it gets really bad, right? Louisiana is generally safe, but New Orleans is there, right? And so, and my understanding, that's what you kind of see with some of the urban areas, like Toronto. From my understanding, is much more dangerous than the rest of Canada. But
yeah, 63%, according to a article published just this year, actually a few months ago, 63% of all gun violence in Canada is involved in urban areas.
Yeah.
Just
So
kind of the way it works, unfortunately. The more people you have in one place, the more likely there is to be gun violence, it seems.
Yep.
As far as their buyback program,
so,
I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a horrible idea if you're trying to reduce the number of guns. If you're willing to voluntarily give them up in effort of a buyback program, that's by all means your choice. It just seems that by forcing certain regulations and laws, you may be restricting individual rights. So that's just kind of... Don't know what your guys' thoughts are on that, but I think their buyback program was a fairly successful one from what I've gathered. The research I've done onto it, but also it's completely voluntary. There's no like law in Canada saying you have to give up your guns. It's a voluntary situation.
The U.S. also has a huge gun culture, so a voluntary, giving up of guns, I don't think is going to be nearly as successful here.
I don't disagree. Yeah.
So, well, now you're talking about like securing your weapon in a way where it's accessible, but other people are unable to get to it. Like I know one technology, like they have it so where it has to match your fingerprints or something like that, right? So here's something I'm concerned about. So like in a situation where my child is way too young to use the gun, but she won't always be that small, and if a situation arises where she need to use it and I'm not here, she's kind of rendered, defenseless, even though there's a perfectly, functioning gun there, and she wouldn't be able to use it.
I think in most situations where a child is at home and there's a murderer, even if they have a gun, I doubt they're going to be trained and well enough to defend themselves.
So
Well, not necessarily a child. I'm talking about like a 15 or 16-year-old, because that's like my kid, she's 2, right? So she's not gonna go murder a bunch of people, but a 15, 16, 17-year-old would, and also would be capable of using a gun effectively in self-defense. And so that's what the situation I'm talking about. Not to like someone breaks into the home, and the one person who's able to use that weapon isn't there, like the father or whoever.
So just like driving a car, right? We get them
Mhm.
licensed just like we would any other gun owner, right? They like you get a license at 16. They get a license for a shotgun, right? Class C or
Mhm.
something. And then they get their own gun. And they know where it is, they know how to use it, they've been trained on it. Then that's not a problem at all for me.
Okay. It
It's
seems
the
to me
training
it's just a
in
little
the
unfair to that.
education.
Uh,
That's what I think would be the primary motivator for people to essentially stop these things. Most of these situations happen when people go out and again, it's passion. And again, if you've got a single action weapon, like a shotgun where you have to manually reload it or a bolt action rifle, things like that, the amount of damage you're going to do and the amount you can get away with is completely different than if you've got, say, an M4, a handgun, things like that.
would you be opposed to those, like the semi-automatic weapons, like
If you're licensed properly, just more rigorous licensing. I mean, if you're like, that's when you get into the level where you have to show, okay, you've got a psychological profile, you don't have any arrests, or not arrests, but actual convictions, things like that.
what are your thoughts on gun ownership for those established as mentally ill?
How do you establish mental illness?
Well, I mean,
I
a history of
wouldn't
mental
know how
illness.
to
So, like,
determine that.
well, if someone's found with a history of mental illness, what do you think on their likelihood or the legality of them owning a firearm?
I'm not really expert enough to understand. Like, if I was a psychologist, I could answer that, but it's not my field. So I would have to defer right now. That's why I'm sticking with like a proven history of not using guns responsibly, but a psychologist might be able to have a better answer.
Are you against like high capacity magazines, or do you think it should just fall under the line of if you have proper licensing, you can pretty much own anything you want?
I would call a high capacity like the highest class S licensing you could have.
So no, here's where I was concerned about. So let's say a person is following the law, right? And maybe they didn't meet the rigorous background check to get an AR or a semi-automatic pistol, and so they have their bolt action, and someone with an AR is on a murderous rampage. It, right?
You cut out there a bit, Geo.
Yeah. Okay.
Am I okay? Am I back? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
We can hear you.
You just cut out for a
Okay.
second.
Gotcha. So well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Si. So like, did you say that you were like you're okay with a high capacity magazines?
If it's like a specialty weapon. So like
So,
the
so
people
you
who are
you're making
entrusted
like a
with
class 3.
automatic weapons, basically.
Gotcha. So those are really hard to get.
Good.
Right? You gotta get the stamp and all that type of stuff, and you got to pay like the $200 tax like every year and stuff. So okay,
And register them.
yeah, exactly. So like, I mean, it's a lot of trouble. So most people aren't going to get those. I don't have any sort of class 3 weapons. Now, like, what if like like I'm trying to defend my family against someone with a AR high capacity magazine, and I got a single bolt action rifle. You don't think that put me at a pretty significant disadvantage?
Not particularly. Reason being is you're already at a disadvantage. If you're in a situation like most actual active shooter situations, even if you're fully armed, you're still just going to get plugged before you even notice.
Oh,
not
I mean, maybe
necessarily.
it depends.
So,
So, like, I mean, like, I'm just in the building where the shooting happens. So, like, now, in a way, I could be at an advantage because I know he has a gun. I know where he is because I hear the shooting, but he doesn't know that I have a gun.
Right,
The
and
single
then
bolt.
so if you have the single bolt, you'll be able to line up a shot and fire, and you're going to make sure you're aiming at the right target. Unlike a lot of, people who are good guys with a gun that try and stop people, they often end up shooting the wrong person.
Yeah, but like, so it doesn't always work like that. Especially he's shooting, his adrenaline's pumping. You know, a lot of times. I mean, might sound crazy, but this is what happens. A lot of times people don't even realize you're shot, or they can fight through getting shot, or if they're having body armor, or if the person just miss. Now I'm having to do all of this mechanical work while he's steady putting rounds on me.
If he's put a round on you and you have an M4, you're still kind of screwed.
So so like, it sounds like your rationale is like, hey, I'm already screwed. So it doesn't matter if I'm screwed even worse.
The rationale is it's more important to be able to have a single cleared shot with a single round where you make sure you're hitting the right target than it is if you've already been shot, than to try and make a frantic jump at trying to hit him when you're already down.
But like in an ideal world where a mass shooter comes in, he's shooting people, and I'm able to get in like the perfect position where I get just the right shot on him. Sure, but in a real world situation, that's probably not going to happen.
With a shotgun, you don't have to be super accurate with a shotgun.
With a shotgun, I mean,
like that just
so
negates that.
The guy's wearing body armor.
Yeah,
your shotgun isn't going to do anything.
It's an airsoft pistol at that point.
Yeah, those pellets are going to bounce off his Kevlar.
Doesn't make body armor licensable as well, or illegal.
But that wouldn't stop a criminal on a homicidal rampage from getting it.
That would stop. Again, we go back to the unique situation where you're talking about a planned, a planned assault, which happens, but it's incredibly rare, versus the vast majority of situations where it's an emotional person goes nuts and goes on a rampage, right?
Let's be clear.
There's the world we live in like that, where that's common, and then the situation you're talking about it's just not nearly as common. So why are we worrying about this outlier when we have this situation where this is what we're actually dealing with it? Let's solve that problem. That problem may still exist, and it's bad, and we should think about better ways. But this doesn't hurt anybody.
So two things I want to address real quick. One, there's a comment that says that makes no sense. I'm going to need more clarification. I don't know exactly what you're referring. If you could expand on that, I will gladly address it because it's clearly for me. The second thing being that it, like, in the situation you were just speaking of, like, I grant you that most of the time these are acts of passion, but I'm not talking about an extensive written out plan of attack that these people often do, but the 8-year-old in Texas that just went in there, like, just goes in and just starts killing people. It's not like he wrote out a 10-step plan on how to murder the most people, but people that often go in with body armor, or that they have body armor in their access, and then they go on these murderous sprees. It's not like they're writing out this huge long manifesto of how they're going to murder people. It's that they don't want to necessarily get shot themselves, and so they do things like buy body armor in advance planning of this murderous spree they plan on going on. So you act like, or it seems to me that you have this illusion that people don't take at least some precaution when they're about to go do these things. Admittedly, they're crimes of passion, but people that wear body armor, which has happened in quite a few shootings recently, isn't all that uncommon because people don't want to get shot. So what I'm saying is, like, even if you have a good guy with a gun and something like buckshot or birdshot to shotgun, if he's wearing full body armor, even if it's just Kevlar, but especially if he has plates, you're done for. There's no way that that's going to touch him. And it's not like he has to go and plan this all out. It's just that's
Those
kind
pellets
of
are
it's
gonna
kind of
bounce
been
off.
happening, you know.
But if they're going to plan that much, wouldn't they just plan their assault in a situation where they're not going to have people with that kind of weaponry around? Like, you're not about to go invade
mean,
someone's house.
I think
If
that's
you're
why
that
they
well
pick things like
planned,
schools.
you're just going to kill the dude with the gun first.
Well,
Well, that's
I
the
think
thing.
what
You don't know who's gonna have the gun. Like,
Yeah.
I'm always carrying, and sometimes I wear like pretty skimpy clothing. You would never think that I have a gun on me, and I do. And that's the thing. Like, the perp, he's not going to know who's armed and who isn't. Like, he's
Also,
kind-
that
he
seems to
can-
be why people tend to attack places like schools and grocery stores, because the chances of them having firearms. I know there was one at a military base, but like in general across the board, things like churches, schools, grocery stores is not typically where you find people that are loaded out, ready to go and take down, a small country. So, it seems
I
like
have a comment.
yeah, I saw. We have a couple. It says, what would the non-licensure side recommend to curb mass shootings? It seems like there's no perfect solution, but a clear possibility of harm reduction by putting in a few regulations.
Right.
Anyone
That's
want to
exactly
address
my
that?
point.
But what I would recommend is, here's the thing. These guys who go on these homicidal rampages, they're not just maniacs. For the most part, they're cowards. They're looking for soft targets. And so what we need to do is eliminate the existence of these soft targets. So I think having as many responsible armed people as possible. That's what I recommend.
So if that's the situation you're advocating for, right? We
Mhm.
can see that situation already within our country. So basically you're saying the more guns, the less deaths, right?
Well, the more armed, responsible people. So it's
Right.
but it's
But how do you
it's not
get armed
necessarily-
responsible people other than licensing and regulation?
Well, because I mean not every responsible person may not be able to pass these background checks, or they may not be able to get them inside. So, and another thing too is that where these shootings often happen, they're in places where even your responsible people can't take guns. They're happening.
That is simply not true.
Well,
Because
that's
the
that's
highest
literally what
gun
the school-
deaths in our country are the states with the most amount of gun deaths, right? Are Mississippi, Louisiana, Wyoming, Missouri, and Alabama, right?
Well, I was
Are
talking
those
about massive
areas-
shootings.
Are those areas with a high amount of gun control or a low amount of gun control?
Low amount, but that's not the type of shooter I was talking about. This is totally different when one dude gets mad at his neighbor and goes shoot somebody up. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in cases where someone who just wants to go shoot and kill as many people as possible. They're going to soft targets, and the best way to find a soft target is a place where it's illegal to take a firearm. That's where you're almost guaranteed to not find a concealed carry.
All right. What do you think are the states with the most mass shootings?
The most
Specifically mass shootings.
So when you define mass shooting, are you talking about like 2 or 3 people shot? Because that's usually what they mean. So if it's more than
Yes.
like three, okay, more than 3 people. So I mean, in that case, it's probably something like Illinois due to Chicago or something like that. But when the way that a lot of times the FBI is describing mass shooting, that's not what I'm talking about. Like, I'm talking about in a case when there's a guy just on a rampage who runs in and tries to shoot as many people as possible. I'm not talking about at a club where shooting happens and 3 people get shot in the leg, and that is technically a mass shooting.
And this is where we go that you have to get more and more specific. And we have like general problems that I'm trying to solve and limit the amount of people dying by guns, which is clearly happening in states with more lax gun control. and you're worrying about this super specific situation, and you might be right, but even you haven't provided stats that show that what you're saying is more likely.
Well,
Like, show me
so I mean, so
something.
I'm. It's not that it's also well at the beginning, like I'm not just concerned about stopping mass shootings, right? I'm concerned about all the shootings, but that's just what I was talking about just at the beginning, right? So
Right, and I tried to
I mean,
use a
at this moment,
tangential example.
yeah, that's what I was talking about. As far as shootings, in general, I mean, that's a pretty complicated problem. But I mean, making it harder for uh, people to acquire guns legally, I'm not sure how that's gonna work. Because like if you look in these areas where there's a lot of shootings, like especially like Chicago, Detroit, I mean, these are gangbangers, drug dealers, these are criminals. Those are the type of people that would definitely have access to the black market that we were discussing earlier during the podcast. They're going to be able to get these guns illegally. I don't see how making someone like you or I pass a background check is going to stop, some gangster disciple or blood or crip, from getting a gun and then shooting somebody in his opposing gang.
Well, that's why I'm saying we have a licensing with levels, right? So if you need to get a shotgun, cool. But if you want an M4, that's a completely different situation, right? A semi-automatic weapon, such as an M4 with lower recoil, is going to be able to kill a lot more people in a short amount of time. You do not need that compared to, say, a shotgun or some sort of rifle that requires a bolt action to move that can pass.
So, but these gangbangers who are taking up the vast majority of the shootings in this country, they're not going to go through that process.
So I want to address two things really quickly while you're paused.
Yeah.
The first being that I just did the math and research real quick. The answer is California is the state with the most mass shootings as of this year.
Yes, it is.
January
For most
1st.
people, sure.
Yeah, well, in general, so when I say mass shootings, I mean in which 3 or more people died. California is very gun restrictive. Number 2 was a tie between Texas and Michigan. So that's just to put that out there. Texas is very open on gun laws. California, very restrictive. Michigan, very restrictive. But I wanted to ask a question, just kind of pose it. What about the guns that are already out there? Like, private sales in the United States are a huge chunk of gun sales in the United States. And then B, they're not going anywhere. It's estimated there are almost 40 million guns in the United States. So even if you start restricting gun sales now for new guns that are on the market, new guns that get made pretty much every day, things like restricting or putting a licensing system on how you buy guns doesn't matter in a private sale, and cash often is king. People that...
Why shouldn't it matter in a private sale?
But
that makes no sense. Why would you make something where
John
just
Doe,
a
John Doe
company
comes...
selling it to his friend is free of all these restrictions, whereas that doesn't make any sense. Why do that?
So let me clarify. John Doe is a gangbanger with a lot of spare cash. Joe Smith has a gun that's semi-automatic. He buys the gun from Joe Smith, and then John Doe goes and shoots up a school. Congratulations, you haven't solved any problem.
Like, right, but you do create a chain of liability where, again, that person can go sue the other person.
So what you're saying is we need to track every sale, including private sales in the United States, and assume that licensing requirements are met for every private sale in the United States, and then keep up with them throughout the sales of firearms in the private sales of firearms in the United States when there's already 40 million of them on the street.
Well, there needs to be a line. There needs to be a chain, right, between these firearm sales, just like we do with cars already. So yeah, just register it. It's not hard.
So you think
we do it with your car, like your vehicle? I can put in your VIN in Carfax, and I can look up who's owned it, how many accidents it's had, all that stuff. So we already track something that we use every single day. All of us are tied to it. The government already has that data, right? We already buy into this system. The only difference is it'd be a gun rather than a car.
So when I was saying earlier about the guns just becoming a black market, right? And the vast majority of these mass shootings, right, where people or three people are shot, right? They're happening in these urban areas with among gangbangers and drug dealers. Like, clearly they're not going to go through this legal process, and since they're already, living a criminal lifestyle, they already have access to the black market. How would that stop them from getting these weapons?
Well, you're calling them all gangbangers, and that's not necessarily true. Like just because somebody's living in like the projects or something
Well,
in a
that's not
bad
what I
area
mean.
doesn't mean. But like it's not just these heavy duty gangbangers. I mean, a lot of these like my mother taught at in the middle of the city in San Francisco, in the Mission District, in the middle of where all what you would call gangbangers are there, and they're literally just kids, right? They're kids and it's in a state where the police aren't looking out for them. They have to like if they call the cops, nothing happens. And yes, they're going to turn to guns for protection, but that's failures of the rest of our system. And blaming like saying, "Oh, these guys are getting it because of just the fact that they're have access to guns." Well, they have access to guns because America's failed them in other ways.
So,
I mean, I don't think in large part it's the like some of the good children that you were talking about that your mother teach. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the people in that community that make that neighborhood what it is, a horrible place to live.
Well,
Those are the ones that are
it's the
doing the killing.
poverty that makes that place a horrible place to live. It's the economic
Sure.
conditions of the situation. Like my mom literally had a guy come up say, "Miss, I'm not going to say my last name. I'm going to go and shoot you." You know what she did? She sat him down and she talked with him for about 2 hours. I had to walk home from school that day. She gave me a call. She's like, "Hey, start walking." And she talked through with him and he exposed all this stuff. Oh, I haven't eaten in 3 days. Oh, my mom this. Oh, like, I don't know what to do. And he just starts breaking down crying in front of her because these are the economic conditions of the people you're talking about. This is the reason why that crime is happening. And blaming it on the fact, like making them out to be a scapegoat, where it's like, oh, they're the ones that are getting the guns and like they're going to just be violent no matter what.
No,
This
I
is
don't think
a
that.
situation where we need a holistic approach. We need to tackle all of our society's things. And limiting the ability to get a guns does not stop us from dealing with that situation as well. But it
can I
does limit
pause
the
you real quick?
crimes of passion that are so common.
So to me, and this is just thinking out loud here, it kind of seems like you're saying guns aren't really the problem, their circumstances are.
Guns are the method for basically expressing that problem. That's why we see
So if you take
these
away their
kids
guns,
in
aren't they
particular
going to find
going on
another
a
way to
lot of these
express
mass
it?
rampages and it's the number one death of children is death by gun homicide, right? This is something that's being expressed and it is an expression of larger problems, but the way to start curbing that is to try and eliminate that their access to that quick and easy solution.
So it seems like you're saying guns as an expressive manner. If you took away or if you added complications to them getting a gun, wouldn't it just complicate their problems? I mean, it seems like you're saying guns aren't the problem, but guns are the problem, and like the problem
Guns
is.
aren't the root, no, but the ability to get a gun easier than it is solving those problems. Like if it's easier to go buy a gun than it is to go to get food, then yes, what are you going to do? You're going to buy a gun because it's easier to do that. If you make it slightly more difficult, it's going to be a pain and people aren't going to do it as much. And it's a hard reality we live in, but that's the world we live in.
Yeah, but I mean, there's nowhere in the world in which it's like even in the most desecrate of places in which it's easier to buy a gun than food. I mean,
For
there's no way it's not
today,
going to
but
be
if
more
you're thinking about
expensive. There's no way it's not going
when
to
you
be
buy, if you
like.
can save up to buy a single, oh, you weren't done, sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, there's no way it's not going to be prohibitively more expensive. There's no way it's like not going to be extremely more effortive. I mean, you can buy food at a gas station. Just Plus, it's probably going to be very more like costly compared to just buying food. You could probably live off of, several months of groceries for what it's going to cost you to buy a gun.
But the perceived cost of getting out of your situation is what they're buying. When you have a gun and you go on a rampage, you're getting out of your situation one way or another. And that's the real problem they're trying to solve.
I mean, it seems to me that's not always the case. Otherwise, that gun would typically be used for suicide.
What do you think a mass shooting is? It's just suicide in a different
Not
way.
necessarily. I mean, there have been situations in which someone's gone on a murderous spree and then voluntarily gave up. And then sit on death row their whole life. I mean, they get free food and housing, but that's in a prison cell. That's
right, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is where most suicide members end up not committing suicide. Like most people who attempt suicide, if they survive, 9 out of 10 of them don't go on to commit suicide.
So there was a study from the University of Chicago, and what it found was that about 3% of murders committed with guns were from people who legally acquired them. So leaving 97% of those guns were committed from people who illegally acquired them. So in this situation, these were people who would not have gone through the procedure that you're laying out. It would have acquired them by some other means, either black market or stolen, etc.
But I already answered that with the chain of custody, right? If somebody's more if everybody's more responsible with their guns, we don't have all these guns just laying out. If there's a chain of custody, you're going to take care of your guns. Right.
So, and this is what I was talking about. So like guns coming, we can't stop drugs from coming over here. And that's what I was talking about, guns coming over here through the border, via the black market. Also, guns that are stolen. So if a gun is stolen, that's not your fault. I mean, it could be, but I mean, it wouldn't make sense to say you're vicariously responsible for some sort of murder if your gun is just stolen, something like that. So what I'm saying is,
it would make sense that you get like involuntary manslaughter for having a gun out available for anybody to just pick up and use.
Well, what about the guns that's coming from over the border? And this is what I'm saying. This is where the vast majority of the drugs has come from. Like since we started the drug war, this is where they've been coming from. And it just, to me, it just makes so much sense that if we're going to use this, we're going to employ the same methods we use to fight drugs that we're going to use to fight guns. They're going to be coming from the same place.
I don't think we should use the methods we use to fight drugs. I think we should use the methods that the countries that actually won the drug war use, which is what I'm trying to propose, which is slight deregulation, education, and actual healthcare progressive measures.
But you wouldn't be able to use their same methods they used to win the gun war with.
Why?
We can't control that border. We can't stop guns from coming over here anymore.
But they didn't control the inflow of drugs in the other countries. They dealt with the people's attitudes at home, and they tried to fix that through education and understanding and healthcare. That's why needle programs are actually super effective in getting drug addicts to get off of drugs, because they finally have a safe person to talk to about drugs.
So, but if they were to use, why not employ that same method with guns then? Instead of, trying to make them harder to get to, just, encourage training.
Yeah, that's exactly what licensing does. That's the point. It's not necessarily about limiting people's ability to get it right away. Well, that's part of it. And again, if you want to have drugs in other countries, there's either special places you use it. So if we have just special places you can shoot off a gun, cool, but that's not really the same way guns work. But and then limit, be licensed, have a prescription, things like that.
Okay. So quick
stats for you.
I swear I'm not trying to be dense here. Not to keep bringing up the Mexico scenario. So let's say we made guns. We made the perfect law to stop the bad people from getting those guns, right? They're going to be they're going to be met with the black market. How would we prevent these bad guys from getting guns on the black market?
So the point is, again, I've said it a couple times,
Yeah.
it's not about limiting everybody's about chance to get a gun. It's to show that limiting saves the most amount of people. This is why the states with the least amount of gun control have the most amount of gun violence.
I mean, that's just definitely not true as far as mass
Yeah,
murder.
no, it's not
We
true.
could
It's
literally talk about
California. I
California
thought
and Michigan.
No,
You
that
said
was for mass
California?
shootings.
Well, that was the number of 3 or more, and this year was California tied by Michigan and Texas at second. So,
It's just
So
Chicago's
the most
another hot
amount of
spot with-
gun-related deaths are Mississippi with 28.6 per 100,000, Louisiana with 26.3 per 100,000, Wyoming 2.59, Missouri 23.9, Alabama 23.6. The lowest, just said,
you broke up a little bit.
he cut out.
Yeah.
Hey, Si, can you stay there?
yeah. So the lowest is Rhode Island is New York with only 5.3, Rhode Island with 5.1, New Jersey with 5 per 100,000, Massachusetts and Hawaii. Like, more gun control has a huge effect on how many people actually die from guns.
I
Okay,
mean,
but
I would
why do you
slightly-
think it's so high in California?
I would also slightly
And-
debate that by pointing out the fact that the state with the most guns, which is New Hampshire, doesn't have a disproportionately high amount of gun violence. They set the record as of 2019. It's 13.8 guns per person in New Hampshire, and 6 Hour, the huge manufacturer of guns in the United States, is based out of New Hampshire. Also, there's a huge manufacturing plant for, I think it's Winchester in Massachusetts. So it's not like guns aren't available.
Well, again, there's always going to be outliers with any statistic.
But I mean, there's a crap ton of outliers though. So like you have the entire state of California, you have Chicago where it's hotly regulated, you have Camden, New Jersey, you have Baltimore. What else?
The state of New
Detroit.
Hampshire, the
I mean,
state of-
California
there's
is
a lot
the
of-
lowest amount. It's less than 10 per 100,000 people.
What-
So,
what's
like,
it-
yeah, they had the
number
most
one in
amount of
Detroit?
mass shootings categorized, but they still, on average, if you take all gun deaths, it was less than Arizona, Nevada, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming.
I mean, what Detroit?
No, we're talking about California.
Okay. All right, because like I'm
Michigan
saying,
is about average.
Yeah, so quick 2 things. We're at our time. If you guys want to continue, we're more than welcome to do so. Quick comment. It says, aren't most gun deaths a result of suicide? I believe it was over half of all gun deaths in 2020. That may have been the case in 2020. However, I think the 2022 statistic as of May, which was last month, showed that gun deaths made up about 24% of about 24% of suicide. And then to re-follow up on suicide attempts, not to belabor the point, but at least 37% of people who have attempted suicide made at least one further attempt, at least according to a study done in 2020. So just wanted to address all
Right,
those
but
things.
also according to a study done in 2020, 9 out of 10 people who attempt suicide and survive do not go on to die, which is the important thing by suicide. Making a second attempt and surviving it is not the same as them actually dying, because you can make a third, a fourth, a fifth.
This is
So-
going to sound like a terrible thing, and I apologize in advance if you know someone that's succumbed to it, but if you're attempting suicide multiple times, I kind of hope it's successful because you genuinely think that your life isn't worth living. And to try and fail
Or it's just a
multiple
mean of
times is
attention getting,
really, really
or
bad.
not knowing how to actually solve the problem which you're trying to get attention for.
I mean, I don't think most suicide attempts are begging for attention in and of themselves. That may be the after result, but I think most suicide attempts are to end their own life, but that's just me.
Well, it's like a cry for help, right? You don't know what else to do. I mean, have you ever had suicidal ideations?
Yeah, I mean, not to get too personal, but it's something I deal with on a daily basis, so it's not like I don't know what I'm talking about. It's just to me, it's not. My suicidal thoughts don't beg for me screaming for attention. It's a chemical imbalance in my brain that I deal with every day. I've tried medications and therapy, and the ideas are still there. It's not an easy
I
battle
think
to fight.
I think I might have said attention differently. I think I mean it differently. I don't mean like, oh, you're a child. I think it's more something needs to be done. Like you said, there's a chemical imbalance. It could be psychological imbalance too, but something needs to change. And your body is essentially having a negative feedback loop. And having you have a quick and easy option for this problem that's really not the core of it, right? Nobody wants you to die. Like you've been put on this great show and we've all had a great time and we're all enjoying it and we all really appreciate it. But having an easy out when we want you to fight through it, you know, all the people that will help, you will help just by having this little debate, wouldn't have it without you. And having a quick and easy option for you to leave is just, why not put barriers in front of it? I want you to survive.
I mean, that's all well and good, and like, don't take this the wrong way at all. And it's not from I swear to you, this is a logical point, not a I'm dealing with that right now kind of thing. But I should have the right to do whatever I want with my body, and I say that for anyone and any situation across the board. If I wanted to go and get high right now, I should be able to do that. If I wanted to go and blow my brains out, I should also be able to do that. It's my body, and I should have full bodily autonomy. And I don't think anyone, you, the government, anyone else, should have any right to say on what I do with it. And if I ever got to the point where I was in such a detrimental state and I decided that's the route I wanted to go, I hope people just look at me and respect the fact that I put a lot of time and consideration into doing something. It wasn't just me doing things on a whim. I can't say the same for anyone else. I can't say that that's a good thing. I'm not saying it is. I'm not promoting the idea or concept of suicide. I'm just saying there are situations, because I have been down in the dumps before, in which I felt that was genuinely the only option. And it's surprising at times that I have made it this far in life. But if I decided in the future that that's something that I wanted to proceed with, it's my body and my right to do so, and no one should be able to stop me.
I agree, but you don't need a gun to do that.
I'm saying that's a really, really easy, effective, and very close to pain-free way. When looking at attempted suicide thoughts, the reason guns are used most often is because there's actually a really interesting scale you can look up of perceived pain and length of time. And when you consider things like hanging, often people do things like suffocation. It's considered a very, very painful death. It also takes a long time. Things like shotguns to the face, typically 99% effective and very low pain, if any. Your brain probably doesn't notice. And then there are other things like drowning yourself, trying to, cut yourself. There's genuinely a scale of pain tolerance and the amount of pain you're going to feel and suffer versus the amount of time it's going to take to kill you. And there are things like shotguns that typically 99.99% effective, zero pain, or so much like it's so quick that you just like your brainstem is gone. So, again, it's not to promote this idea. I'm just saying that in cases in which people are trying to do this, it seems like it's a really good option. Because until we allow things like assisted suicide from doctors at any age, there's really not a better solution.
So if that's the case, if you've really thought this through to the point where you're talking, why can't you just go get a license?
I mean, essentially, you're saying that mental illness would probably stop me from getting a license.
No, I said it would prevent licenses at higher levels. Remember, I'm talking about the qualifications for a car for like your basic shotgun or bolt action weapon. For
Would you be okay with a suicidal person? Let's say you go to try to apply for your gun license and you put up there, hey, I am suicidal. You'd be okay with them?
Yeah. Would it be okay to just? Would it be okay to put that on your application? Like, the intent of my buying this gun is to blow my brains out.
That's a great question. And from a liberty point of view, right? I would have to say yes for the lower class single thing weapon. But when it comes to, again, an assault rifle, an automatic weapon, that's a handgun even, that's a different situation. If you've got nothing to lose.
Assuming a shotgun would fall in like the lowest of all classes, like I mean, I'm fairly okay with that, given that it's a pretty good option. Most people typically use handguns because it's a little easier to deal with and manage.
It also causes a few more survivors.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
that's a real
shotgun bolt
situation.
action, right? It's large enough for self defense. It's not concealable. You're not going to take out 10, 15 people with a 3-round shotgun or even a single load shotgun, right? You might take out 3 if you're a good shot, but it's like the amount of damage caused is completely different than if you have these M4s.
Gio, I know you typically feed your child around this time. Are you good to continue? Do you want to continue? Should we put this off or?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get ready to go. But like,
yeah.
if you wanted to continue, I mean, go ahead.
I mean, I'm good for just kind of putting it on pause. Maybe we can pick it up later or have you on for a different topic. I mean, I think you were incredibly respectful.
Definitely.
I
man.
appreciate it. This was a good conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. You guys are awesome. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Anything you wanted to plug or anything while you're here? I mean, you're more than welcome to maintain anonymity, or if you want to plug something, you're welcome to do so. It's not like we're huge, but you can do it.
No, you could check out Now That's Debatable on Facebook.
I appreciate it. Well,
but other than that,
Cy.
I'm Cy, and I'm just a guy.
All right, appreciate it, Cy. Thank you for coming on. Gio, of course, it's always good to have you on. We are going to take off, but we may continue this in a future podcast if that's something you guys want us to see. Thank you, Jesse. This is a great discussion, everyone. It's not up on the screen, but there was comments on YouTube. There was comments from Gunslinger that we didn't officially get clarification on. I know who that is, so I'll address that with them in person. But thank you so much for having us on, or for coming on, Cy. We appreciate it. It was a very respectful and polite conversation. I do appreciate your patience with us. And we will see you guys next week.